The National LGBT Federation is an Irish NGO working for the betterment of lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgendered people. And this year we're celebrating our 35th anniversary.
Its responsibility has always been directly to community needs in social and cultural terms, with a strong political edge.
I think one of the really big achievements for the National LGBT Federation is that historically we've always created safe spaces for the community, even if that was on a dodgy dance floor in the Hirschfield Centre.
It was an old, what they call in America, a loft building. It had been a tea tasters, and what started the whole of Temple Bar was what we began there in number 10 Upper Fowne Street, which we called the Hirschfeld Centre after Magnus Hirschfeld.
A fairly shabby three-storey warehouse on a street that was half derelict. There was nothing on the front of the building that actually, we didn't even have a name plaque up until a year later. There was nothing on the front of the building that actually indicated that it was a palace of leisure and political activity for Ireland's queers.
We opened on St. Patrick's Night, 1979. As the people were dancing, there was deflection on the beams, because we'd expected about 50 or 100 people, but I think 300 got in, and there was another 300 or 400 out in the street trying to push the door in to get in.
Then you had offices for the main organisations, the youth group, NGF, the women's group, and Telefriends Gay Switchboard.
There were a great number of things going on, and the Hirschfeld Centre was the hub of it. There was no place else. There was absolutely no place else to go. There was active hostility against it. But nobody was ever hurt, because we all stuck together.
It's hard for people now to understand that there were quite a lot of people who didn't come on the board, for example, of the NLGF, because they couldn't be out. And people who would come on the board and say, well, I'll do it, but you can't use my name. It was a society where people couldn't really be publicly out for fear of what would happen in their families, in their workplaces, socially, in all kinds of ways.
Everything was happening at the same time. We provided the social life that brought people into the situation. Some of them would then get politically involved and so on, but the political movement continued all the time.
That then evolved into saying, well, there are other cultural and social needs. So, of course, a newspaper, a magazine, a very important way of people actually knowing who was literally out there.
In Touch magazine, Identity magazine, Out magazine, NGF News, NGF Newsletter, GCN.
We also had newsletters, and we also authorised the publication of a great number of leaflets on safe sex when that became necessary because of AIDS.
All done with the fabulous earnestness of people who wanted to get information out there and put people, lonely, isolated people living in sometimes shabby, horrible, second-rate lives all over Ireland, to put people in touch with each other at a time when there were no publications, at a time when the government was actively pursuing the censorship of information and censorship of access.
Well, one of the things I have always really valued about the NLGF is that a very important part of our work has been about keeping a record or keeping records.
So there's a lot of ephemera, but sometimes through ephemera you catch the spirit of the age, and that's one of the reasons the archive is important. The history of gay people has never been properly recorded, and now in the 20th, to the end of the 20th, beginning of the 21st century, is the first time there's been any attempt to comprehensively record it. And I think it was a very important part of our role to do that, to document what happened.
Most people who know me immediately identify my LGBT political work with the Irish Queer Archive, which is a project I've been involved with since it was formally constituted in 1997.
In 2008, the Irish Queer Archive was handed over to the National Library, and that was a very good development between the Queer Archive Working Group and the National Lesbian and Gay Federation to secure a long-term future and accessibility.
Well, the NLGF are the publishers of GCN, and they founded GCN. Tony Walsh and Catherine Glendon in particular came together to do a new publication. This one was to be a little different in that it wasn't to be sold in the shops. It was to be a free information service and resource for the LGBT community.
I think that's one of the things that the National LGBT Federation has always done really well, and that's been one of our pivotal pieces of work and a flagship piece of work.
All of those issues after countless issues of GCN are a record of the everyday lives of people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans and queer in this country, and that is extremely important.
In the early 1990s, there was an award called the Hirschfeld Award, which was awarded by the NLGF to a single person on an annual level who did good or who had advanced equality and quality of life for gay people in Ireland. I said to them, well, maybe we should bring it back, but you know, maybe expand it and make it into an annual awards ceremony.
We set up the galas 5 years ago to honour lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered people and organisations for their contributions to society, really, and also to acknowledge the contributions of our allies in supporting equality and our quest for equality.
The NLGF has always had a very acute political sensibility and awareness, always very alert, obviously, to what are the important political issues, and among many others, we've been involved with the issue of same-sex marriage really from the get-go.
We were involved in the setup of marriage equality and one of the founding organisations, let's say, of the marriage equality movement, and we would see marriage equality and achieving marriage equality as one of our fundamental aims.
For the next 15 months, until June of 2015, when we're going to be having a referendum on marriage equality, the NLGF is going to have a very big role in helping to convince the Irish public that this is a matter for everybody, not just for people who are LGBT.
I think there's this erroneous belief that the minute marriage equality is introduced, that everything will be hunky-dory for LGBT people in Ireland, and that's not the case. You know, we have centuries of prejudice to overcome, and as we've seen in the recent debate around homophobia, we have our own internal homophobia to overcome too.
Equality isn't something that's just on paper. It's how we live our lives, how we're perceived, how we engage with society and how society engages with us.
We have a very long way to go to fight for equality and for real justice for LGBTQI people across the world.
We need to stay cohesive, we need to stay strong, and we need to fight for a society that one day nobody will be bullied or oppressed because of their sexuality, and nobody will be singled out or bullied and oppressed for their gender orientation.
I think we also need, and we're campaigning towards the eradication of Section 37 so that nurses and teachers can be open about their sexuality in schools and hospitals. We're also trying to campaign for gender recognition for our trans community. But one of the things I always say is that until we build a culture where difference and diversity is celebrated, and I mean really celebrated, where people can truly be themselves, including their outrageous selves, well then the National LGBT Federation will be right here.